The steak on my plate was cooked medium rare, the way I always asked for it, but the first bite tasted like metal. Not bad seasoning, something else, like pennies on my tongue. We were at my parents' dining table in their house outside Charlotte, the one with the tall windows that looked out onto a yard they never used. The room smelled like a warm candle, cedar maybe, and the air always felt slightly too still, like you were supposed to speak only when spoken to. My sister Erin sat across from me, folding her napkin with careful fingers. Her husband Mark was laughing softly at something my dad had said, the kind of laugh you use when you want to stay in good standing. My mom poured more wine into my dad's glass without asking. It was all practiced. Everyone knew their role. Then my mom set her bottle down and said, almost casually, "We're going to sell the cabin." She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked at the table runner, like she was talking about replacing the dishwasher. My dad nodded once, eyes on his plate. "It's time," he added. "We've discussed it." I held my fork still. I didn't ask what cabin, because there was only one. The little place by the lake, the one my grandmother had kept for decades, the one that always smelled like old pine boards and sunscreen, the one with the dock I repaired every spring because nobody else would. My mom continued, as if she was making an announcement about a family trip. "The money will help Erin and Mark with their new place. They need the room, and Mark's firm, well, you know how those things are." I could hear the refrigerator motor in the kitchen kick on, a low hum under the silence. I set my fork down. Not hard, just enough to make a small, neat sound against the plate. "That was Grandma's," I said. My dad finally looked up, but not at me. He looked past me, toward the window. "Your sister has a family," he said. "2 kids. A future to think about." My mom's tone stayed smooth. "You're doing fine. You always land on your feet." Erin didn't speak. She didn't need to. She sat there with her shoulders relaxed, her wedding ring catching the light when she lifted her glass. She took a sip and watched me over the rim like she already knew how this would end. I waited a beat, just long enough to make sure no one was going to correct it. No one was going to say, "Actually, we should talk about this together." No one was going to ask what I thought. My dad cleared his throat. "It's just the order of things," he said. "Erin's family comes first." That line sat in the air longer than it should have, like it had been there for years, and I was only now hearing it out loud. I nodded once. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even push my chair back. "I understand," I said. Erin's mouth moved slightly, a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't big. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of expression you make when you're certain you've won something you didn't earn. Nobody else noticed. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. Cold, clean, simple. A few minutes later, my mom started talking about school schedules and the realtor they liked, and my dad asked Mark about his office downtown. The conversation rolled on like nothing had happened. But in my head, something clicked into place. Not anger, not a plan, just clarity. Because for years, I had been the person they called when something went wrong. When the cabin roof leaked, I drove up with a ladder and tarps. When my dad had a health scare one winter, I left a client meeting early and drove through sleet to take him to the ER. When Erin needed help, just for a month, the money always came from me. Quietly. No receipts, no fuss. Even at dinner, Erin wore a thin gold bracelet I'd bought 3 Christmases earlier because she said she'd always wanted something simple. That night, it flashed every time she moved her wrist, like a tiny reminder. I finished my meal without tasting it. When dessert came out, I smiled at the right moments. I asked my niece about her soccer game. I complimented my mom's cake. I kept my voice even. And the whole time, I kept thinking about one specific detail I'd seen earlier that day. A large manila envelope sitting on the corner of my dad's desk when I stopped by to drop off a document he'd asked me to review. It wasn't addressed to him. It had a printed label, and the return address was from a firm I recognized. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't opened it. I just noticed it, the way you notice a car parked too close to your driveway. At the end of the night, my mom hugged me at the door and said, "You're such a help, honey." My dad nodded like he was satisfied the world was still in its proper shape. Erin hugged me last. Her perfume was sweet and heavy, and she patted my back twice, like you do with someone who's useful. "Love you," she said. "I know," I said back, because it was the simplest thing to say. I walked out into the cool air and got into my car. I didn't sit there scrolling on my phone. I didn't call anyone. I put the key in the ignition and just held it for a second without turning it. Then I drove home. When I got inside my apartment, I didn't take my shoes off right away. I went straight to my kitchen counter and set my purse down. I stood there, still in my coat, and stared at the quiet space like I was waiting for a sound. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. It was short, and it made my stomach go flat and cold in a way the steak never could. I didn't answer right away. I put the phone face down. Then I waited. I left my phone face down on the counter long enough for the screen to go dark. Then I picked it up and read the text again, slowly, like the words might change if I stared at them hard enough. "Dad, send me the account login when you get a chance. We may need to move some things around for the cabin sale." No please, no question. Just an assumption that the machinery I'd built was theirs to operate. I set the phone back down and took my coat off. I hung it in the closet the same way I always did, sleeve straightened, collar flattened. It wasn't a performance. It was routine. The kind of routine you develop when you learn early that calm is useful. My apartment was quiet. A small place in South End, clean, minimal, nothing extravagant. I kept it that way because the rest of my life was loud, in invisible ways. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window for a minute. Below, traffic moved in soft waves, headlights sliding along the street. I didn't feel like crying. I didn't feel like yelling. What I felt was something more precise. A simple inventory. I opened my laptop and logged into my work systems. Not because I had to, but because it helped me think. My firm was boutique, small enough to stay nimble, large enough to be serious. I managed private portfolios, structured long-term plans, and occasionally cleaned up messes left by other people who treated money like it was a mood. Most nights, my work felt controlled. Numbers behaved. Paperwork made sense. If someone followed the steps, the outcome was predictable. Family was the only place where effort never guaranteed anything. I scrolled through a folder labeled Family, the one I'd kept for years without telling anyone. It wasn't dramatic. It was basic record keeping. Wire confirmations, loan payoffs, screenshots of temporary requests, a few signed notes my parents had asked for when they wanted to make things official for tax purposes. I didn't keep it to punish them. I kept it the way you keep insurance, because I'd learned over time that my parents didn't remember my help the way I did. To them, it wasn't help. It was simply the way things worked, like gravity. It hadn't started with the cabin. The cabin was just the first time they said the quiet part out loud. When my grandmother was still alive, she used to call me on Sunday afternoons. She'd ask about my week, my clients, the book I was reading. She had this habit of pausing before she spoke, as if she was organizing her thoughts into something gentle. Erin rarely answered Grandma's calls. Not because she was cruel. She just always had something else going on. A yoga retreat, a birthday weekend, a new phase, a new interest, a new need. My parents called Erin spirited, creative, sensitive. They called me capable. Capable became a kind of family currency. It meant I didn't require attention. It meant my disappointment was safe to ignore. When Erin decided she wanted to do a year abroad, my parents threw a dinner party for her. They invited family friends, people from church, Mark's parents back when he was just a boyfriend. Everyone raised glasses and toasted her bravery. That night, my mom pulled me aside near the sink and said, "Your college savings will help cover it. You're fine. You'll figure your way out." I was 19 then. I remember nodding like it was a normal request. I took more hours at the campus library. I picked up weekend shifts in a quiet restaurant. I didn't tell anyone I was tired. I didn't want to be the kind of person who complained about something as solvable as money. And I did figure it out. I finished my degree in finance and built my career in a way that looked smooth from the outside. Clean suits, clean spreadsheets, clean progress. But in the family, I stayed in the same place. The one who handled things. When Aaron wanted a wedding that looked like a magazine spread, my parents leaned on me the same way they always did. "You understand budgets," my mom said, smiling like it was a compliment. "Just help us make it work." And help meant I made the monthly payment on the second mortgage they'd taken out to fund it. They didn't call it debt. They called it love. Erin didn't ask. She thanked them. She thanked me too, once, in passing, while adjusting the hem of her dress. After the wedding, she and Mark moved into a house that was just beyond what they could comfortably afford. And then the pattern settled in. A little help for the holidays, a bridge loan for a business idea, a sudden, unexpected expense, a short-term gap that turned into a long-term assumption. If Aaron asked my parents asked me. Sometimes my mom would dress it up. "She's under so much pressure," she'd say. "You don't understand because you're independent." Independent was another label they used when they wanted to justify something unfair. If I pushed back, even lightly, my dad would lean back in his chair and say, "Why are you making it a big deal? It's family." Family meant there was no finish line, no repayment date, no balance sheet. And the cabin was always part of that unspoken arrangement. My grandmother had told me more than once, that place will always be there for you. Not as a legal guarantee, as a promise. The kind of promise older people make when they believe the family will honor its own story. I believed it too, for a long time. I went up there in spring to check the pipes. I replaced broken boards on the dock. I restained the porch steps. I kept a small toolbox in the back closet with my name on it. Erin visited maybe once a year, usually when she wanted photos for a holiday card. My parents visited when they had guests to impress. But I was the one who kept it from falling apart. So when my mom said at that dinner that they'd decided to sell it to fund Erin's next upgrade, it wasn't the money that hit me first. It was the message. You don't have a place here. You don't get a forever. You are useful until you're inconvenient. I stared at my laptop screen until the numbers blurred slightly. Then I blinked and refocused. I opened a new document and typed a heading at the top. Boundaries. I left it there for a minute. No bullet points yet, just the word. Then I opened my email and searched my inbox for the name of the firm on that manila envelope I'd seen on my dad's desk. It took 2 seconds. There it was, from a few months back, forwarded by my dad with a one-line note. "Can you look at this? We don't really understand it." At the time, I'd been in the middle of quarter-end reporting, and I'd told him I'd review it that weekend. I never did. Not because I forgot. Because something in my gut had told me to wait. Now I opened it. It wasn't long. It was a standard-looking set of documents, heavy on legal language, full of deadlines and terms that didn't belong in a family's casual life. And as I read the first page, I felt that earlier clean clarity sharpen into something more focused. Because this wasn't just about selling a cabin. This was about risk, exposure, leverage, and it was sitting in my parents' home, waiting for someone capable to handle it, the way I always had. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom. I didn't answer. I watched it ring out. Then I let the silence settle back into the room. I took a breath, opened the boundaries document, and finally wrote the first line underneath the heading. Step 1. Stop fixing problems I didn't create. I saved the file. Then I went back to the email attachment and started reading more carefully, line by line, as if I were doing it for a client. Because at that moment, I realized something important. My parents weren't just taking me for granted. They were relying on me to rescue them from something they didn't even fully see yet. And I could feel, very clearly, that whatever was coming next was going to arrive fast. I clicked to the final page of the attachment and froze when I saw the date. A deadline. Close enough that it explained why my dad suddenly wanted login access. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then I opened my calendar and began counting forward. Not emotionally, just practically. Then I waited. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The apartment was still dark, and the air had that quiet, early winter chill that makes you pull the blanket up once, then give up and sit up anyway. I made coffee, not because I wanted it, but because it gave my hands something steady to do. When the cup was warm in my palm, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up the documents again. The email attachment wasn't a single form. It was a small stack, the kind that looks harmless if you skim it. A facility, a line, a guarantee. Language designed to make big commitments look like routine maintenance. I read it the way I read a client agreement. Slow, clean, no assumptions. My dad had signed. My mom had signed. Mark's name was in it too, not as the primary borrower, but threaded through the pages like a needle. There were references to collateral that didn't belong in any casual family conversation. Their home, their retirement accounts. A life insurance policy rider I recognized because I'd helped set it up years ago. I sat back and stared at the screen until my coffee cooled. Then I reheated it and kept going. At 8:12 a.m., my phone rang. Erin. I let it ring. When it stopped, the room felt calmer. A minute later, I got a text from her. Erin. Hey, can you call me when you get a sec? Mom's stressed. I didn't respond. At 8:20 a.m., my mom called again. I watched it buzz on the table, then fade. I wasn't punishing them. I wasn't trying to teach anyone a lesson. I was simply doing what I do when something starts to wobble. I paused contact. I gathered facts. I opened a spreadsheet and started listing what I knew and what I needed to confirm. Then I logged into the financial dashboard I use to monitor my clients' accounts. My parents' accounts were there too. For years, I'd managed their retirement portfolio without charging them a fee. I told myself it was practical. I told myself it saved them from making emotional decisions. I told myself it was easier than watching them get talked into something they didn't understand. That morning, I didn't tell myself anything. I clicked into their account history and looked for changes. New payees. New automatic withdrawals. Anything that didn't match their usual pattern. There were 2 entries that stood out immediately. One was a transfer to an unfamiliar holding entity with a name that sounded like a law office pretending not to be one. The other was a recurring withdrawal labeled as premium services. That phrase can mean almost anything. I pulled the statements. Then I pulled the confirmations. The numbers weren't catastrophic yet, not in isolation, but I'd seen this kind of structure before. Small fees that meant larger obligations. Clean labels that hid messy agreements. I opened a separate tab and searched public records the way I'd done for due diligence in a past life, back when I worked under a senior partner who taught me to treat every signature like it mattered. A filing came up, a recent one. It didn't spell out the whole story, but it didn't need to. It confirmed enough. There was a lien tied to an entity Mark had connections to. Not directly, but close enough that I could see the shape of it. I took screenshots and saved them in my family folder, dated and labeled the same way I label client files. Not out of fear, out of habit. At 9:05 a.m., I called my assistant and told her to clear an hour from my calendar at noon. No details, just personal admin. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called a lawyer. Not a dramatic courtroom type. A calm, practical attorney I'd met through a business referral. Someone who spoke in timelines and options, not emotions. His receptionist offered me a slot later in the week. I told her I could do today. She paused, then said, "Hold on." 10 minutes later, I had an appointment at 12:30. I wrote it down on a sticky note and placed it on the edge of my laptop. Then I went back to my parents' portfolio. I hovered my cursor over the reallocate button and sat there for a moment, not clicking. I remembered my dad's text from the night before, asking for login access like I was the family help desk. I remembered my mom's voice at dinner, smooth and certain. I remembered my dad saying, "That's just the order of things." I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel shaky. I felt organized. I opened my boundaries document and added 2 more lines beneath Step 1. Step 2, reduce exposure. Step 3, remove dependency. Then I clicked. I moved their portfolio into a conservative allocation. Safe, liquid, low yield. The kind of choice nobody complains about until they realize what they are not getting. I did it legally, within the permissions they'd given me years ago. I didn't forge anything. I didn't hide anything. I simply made a conservative decision in their stated risk profile, the same profile my dad had insisted on after the last market dip, when he told me, "No more fancy stuff. Keep it safe." I saved the confirmation. Then I opened the standing transfers. The monthly auto payments that came out of my accounts and into theirs, dressed up with gentle labels like support and family and just in case. I didn't delete them all. I paused them. Each one required a reason. Most banks do. I typed the same reason every time. Reassessment. When I finished, the room looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Same table, same coffee mug, same soft street noise outside. But something had shifted. At 11:40 a.m., Aaron texted again. "Aaron, seriously, can you call? Dad's upset." I watched the message sit there. Then I did call, but not Aaron. I called my dad's bank. I asked a simple question about account access and authorized users. I kept my tone polite. I asked for confirmation, not opinions. I requested an audit log of recent access attempts and password resets. The representative didn't give me everything, but she gave me enough to know this was already moving in a direction I didn't like. When I hung up, I looked at the time. 12:08. I closed my laptop, put it in my bag, and grabbed my coat. Before I left, I walked to the bathroom mirror and looked at my face for a moment. Not for reassurance, just to check that I looked like myself. I did. On the way out, I picked my phone up off the counter and finally turned it over. There was one more notification. Not a missed call. A voicemail transcript from my mother, time-stamped 2:03 a.m. from the night before, like she'd been awake while I was sleeping. The first line on the screen read, "Bree, please, we need you to come over. Something happened with Mark." I didn't play it yet. I slid the phone into my coat pocket, locked my apartment door, and walked to my car. Then I drove to the attorney's office, letting the city traffic move around me while I held on to one steady thought. I was done responding to panic. From now on, I was responding to paperwork. And I was going to hear that voicemail in a quiet place where I could take notes. The attorney's office was quiet in the way expensive places usually are. Soft lighting, muted carpet, a receptionist who didn't waste words. I signed in, took a seat, and watched a wall clock that ticked like it had nothing to prove. When the attorney came out, he didn't smile too much. He shook my hand, led me into his office, and waited until I sat down before he spoke. "What's going on?" he asked. I took the email attachment out on my laptop and slid it across the desk so he could see it. Then I kept my hands folded in my lap while he read. His eyes moved steadily, no drama, just concentration. When he reached the signature page, he made a small sound through his nose, the kind that isn't judgment, just recognition. "They signed a guarantee," he said. Yes, I replied. And there's collateral, he added, tapping the screen with a pen. More than they probably realized. Yes. He leaned back slightly. What do you want to happen? I paused, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be precise. I don't want to be responsible for their choices, I said. I also don't want my name attached to a mess I didn't create. He nodded once, like that was a reasonable sentence. Then we build separation, he said. Clean, documented, quiet. He didn't say anything about love or forgiveness. He didn't need to. He spoke in the language I trusted. We spent the next 30 minutes going through what I could do and what I should not do. He gave me a short list, written in plain terms. No theatrics, just rules. I typed it into my notes. Step 1, remove informal financial support. Step 2, limit access, limit assumptions. Step 3, move anything you own into structures that don't invite discussion. Step 4, keep communication boring, short, consistent. Step 5, if you do anything with family property, do it through standard channels, never as a favor. When we finished, he asked, "Are you expecting immediate fallout?" "I'm expecting pressure," I said. He nodded again. Then you don't argue. You don't explain. You repeat the same sentence until they get tired. On the way out, I paid his retainer and walked to my car. The air outside felt clearer than it had in days. Not warmer, just less heavy. I sat in the driver's seat and finally played my mother's voicemail. Her voice came through thin and tight, trying to sound normal and failing. "Bree, call me back. The realtor wants to move quickly on the cabin, and your father says you have the paperwork. Mark's here. He said he can help us organize it. Just come over tonight, okay?" It wasn't an emergency. Not yet. It was something worse for me. An expectation. I didn't call back. I drove home, made myself tea, and opened my boundaries document again. I added one line beneath the attorney's steps. One sentence only. Repeat it. No variation. Then I wrote the sentence. I can't take this on. That evening, my dad called twice. Aaron called once. My mom texted, "Please don't do this to us." Like my silence was an attack instead of a boundary. When I did respond, I kept it simple. "I can't take this on," I texted my mother. She replied instantly, "It's just signatures, don't be difficult." "I can't take this on," I sent back. A minute later, Aaron messaged, "Are you seriously going to make Mom cry over paperwork?" "I can't take this on," I typed, and put the phone down. It felt strange at first. Not guilty, exactly. More like I was walking on a leg that had been asleep and was just starting to wake up. Over the next few weeks, the cabin sale moved forward without me. They found the documents on their own, or Mark did, or they paid someone to explain what I used to explain for free. The world didn't end. It simply adjusted. And I kept adjusting too. I moved my parents' retirement portfolio into conservative holdings and left it there. Safe, liquid, unexciting. If they asked why, I said, market conditions. The same way every financial professional in the country says it when they don't want a debate. I paused the standing transfers and didn't restart them. When Aaron asked for help just this once, I responded with the same sentence. I can't take this on. At Sunday dinners, I made small changes that were easy to maintain. I wore older coats. I stopped bringing wine. I talked about tight months and clients being cautious. Not dramatic, just believable. I stopped mentioning travel and stopped sharing wins. I let them think my life had narrowed because it made them less interested. Erin handled that the way she handled everything. She gave advice nobody asked for. You know, she'd say, tilting her head like she was being kind, if you didn't obsess over work, maybe your life would open up. I'd nod and take a sip of water. Maybe, I'd say. Then I'd go home and work on the parts of my life that didn't include them. Quietly, I made my own structures. I set up an international trust through standard channels, Nothing flashy, nothing illegal, just careful. I shifted assets into it in stages. I changed beneficiary designations. I tightened access on accounts. I kept every confirmation in a folder with dates. The more I did, the calmer I felt. It wasn't about getting back at anyone. It was about finally living like my future belonged to me. About a year after the dinner, I saw a listing online that made my throat tighten. The cabin was gone. Not just sold, but sold quickly. To a development group that specialized in buying lake property and turning it into something polished and expensive. The photos looked wrong. Too bright. Too staged. Like the place had been erased and replaced with an idea of itself. I didn't call my parents. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue about Grandma's promise. I contacted the listing agent. I asked for details. Then I did what my attorney had told me to do. Standard channels, no favors. When the development group decided the cabin wasn't worth holding on to in its current state, I made an offer through an LLC with a plain name and a plain address. The kind of offer that doesn't beg. A month later, I got the confirmation email. I stared at it for a long moment, then saved it in my folder. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. That place wasn't a symbol anymore. It was just property, properly handled, properly protected. 2 years passed that way. 2 years of boring responses. 2 years of Aaron's small smirks at the table when my mother talked about how hard things are these days. 2 years of my father making comments about family pulling together, and then looking past me when the bill came. 2 years of me not arguing, not defending, not pleading. I kept my life steady. I kept my voice even. I kept my sentence the same. Then, on an ordinary night in early fall, my phone rang at 2:07 a.m. Not a text, not a voicemail. A call. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then it rang again immediately. This time, I answered. My mother's voice came through raw and high, stripped of all polish. "Bree," she said, and her breath sounded broken. "You have to come over. Right now. It's Mark. It's the police. Oh God, the house." I sat up in bed, fully awake, and listened without speaking. She kept talking, words tumbling over each other, like she was trying to outpace the truth. I reached for my notepad on the nightstand and clicked a pen. Then I waited. I didn't ask my mother questions on the phone. I grabbed my keys, pulled on a sweater, and drove through empty streets with my headlights low. The radio stayed off. My hand stayed steady on the wheel. When I turned into my parents' neighborhood, I saw the lights before I reached the driveway. A patrol car angled near the curb, blue and red reflections sliding over the front windows like slow water. My mother met me at the door before I could knock. Her hair was loose, her face pale, and her hands were shaking so hard she had trouble turning the lock. Inside, the house felt wrong. Too bright, too crowded. The kind of brightness that makes everything look exposed. A uniformed officer stood near the foyer, calm, not aggressive. Another person, not in uniform, sat at the dining table with a laptop open, speaking quietly to someone on the phone. Mark was on the sofa, leaning forward with his head in his hands. Erin was pacing barefoot, making small, broken sounds like she was trying to talk and breathe at the same time. My father stood near the kitchen counter holding a glass of water he wasn't drinking. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just reduced. When he saw me, he took a step toward me, then stopped like he didn't know what his role was anymore. My mother grabbed my forearm. "Thank God," she whispered. "You're here." I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. "What happened?" I asked, calm enough that my voice surprised even me. My mother turned toward the sofa. "Tell her," she said to Mark, like the truth was his responsibility now. Mark lifted his head. His eyes were red. He tried to speak, then swallowed. "It's complicated," he said. The officer shifted his weight slightly. Not impatient, just present. He watched the room the way you watch a situation that could swing either way, depending on what people choose to do next. I walked to the dining table and stood beside it, not sitting down. Standing kept me clear. It also kept me from being physically pulled into someone else's panic. "Start simple," I said. "What did the police come for?" Mark stared at his hands. Erin answered instead, voice tight and high. "Some people showed up," she said. "They said we're in default. They said they bought the debt." She said debt like it was a rude word. My father finally spoke. "They claim the house is collateral," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. I let that sentence land. Then I looked at Mark. "What did you sign?" I asked. Mark shook his head. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." I waited. Silence, when you use it on purpose, does a specific thing. It forces the other person to either fill it with facts or admit they don't have them. Mark exhaled through his nose. "I was using a strategy," he said. "Leverage. Short-term positions. It was normal in my circles." "In your circles," I repeated quietly. He flinched as if I'd slapped him, but I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't moved. My mother stepped closer. "He was building something for the family," she said quickly. "For Erin and the kids. We didn't want to stand in the way." I looked at my mother. "What did you sign?" My father answered this time like he was trying to be helpful. "Mark said it was paperwork for a bridge," he said. "Just temporary. We didn't understand the language. You know how those forms are." I nodded once. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. Then I asked the next practical question. "Where are the documents?" My mother blinked. "What?" "The documents," I repeated. "The signed agreements, the notices, the emails. Anything they handed you tonight, where are they?" Erin pointed toward the office. "Dad has a folder." I walked into my father's office without asking permission. It wasn't my house, but at that moment, it was also not a place for hesitation. A manila folder sat on the desk, thick and bent at the corners. On top, a notice with a logo I recognized from the filings I'd saved earlier. I picked it up and returned to the dining room. The officer spoke gently. "Ma'am, we're here because there's a civil issue that may become criminal if false statements were made," he said. "At the moment, we've been told a complaint may be filed. No one is being arrested tonight." That made Erin inhale sharply, like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Mark looked up, eyes wide. "I didn't mean to defraud anyone," he said. "I can fix it." The person at the dining table with the laptop ended their call and stood. "I'm from the firm representing the debt holder," he said, measured and professional. "We've delivered notice. The amount due to halt enforcement is $2,400,000. There is a window. It is short." My mother made a sound in her throat that wasn't a word. My father stared at the floor as if numbers could fall through it. Then my father turned to me. Not demanding, pleading. "We need your help," he said. "We need your savings, your accounts. We know you have something set aside." Erin stepped forward fast, like she was afraid the moment would pass. She reached for my sleeve. "Please," she said. "Think of the kids. They can't go through this." I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then at her face. She was sweating. Her eyes were swollen. The old confidence was gone, replaced by the kind of desperation that makes people say things they can't take back. "You're single," she added quickly, like it was a useful argument. "You can rebuild. We can't. We're a family." That word again. Family. I waited until she stopped talking. Then I spoke. "I'm not making any decisions tonight," I said. My mother stared at me like she didn't recognize the tone. "Bree, there's no time," she said. "They said 48 hours." I nodded. I heard. My father's voice rose, not into a shout, but into something strained. "Then what are you doing? Standing there?" I kept my voice even. "I'm gathering facts." Mark pushed up from the sofa. "If you can just loan it," he said. trying to sound reasonable. I can unwind positions. I can sell assets. The person from the firm adjusted his tablet. With respect, he said, you're past that point. This is enforcement. This is not investment strategy. That sentence hit the room like a cold draft. Erin turned back to me again, eyes wet. You have to, she said. You always help. You always do. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said the sentence I'd practiced. I can't take this on. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then she tried again. Yes, you can, she said, as if correcting me. You can. You're upset about the cabin. That was different. I didn't react to the word different. I didn't correct her. I didn't bring up Grandma. I didn't bring up the dinner. I repeated the sentence. I can't take this on. My father's face tightened. Are you really going to let your sister lose everything? He asked. I didn't answer the emotional question. I answered the practical one. I will review whatever you signed, I said. I will tell you what it means, and I will tell you what options exist. Erin blinked, confused. That's not enough, she said. It's what I'm offering, I replied. The representative from the firm checked his phone, then looked up. If someone wants to discuss settlement, we can schedule a call in the morning, he said. I nodded. Good. My mother grabbed my hand now tight. Bree, please, she whispered. We raised you. We did everything for you. I looked at her and I kept my face calm, but I took my hand back gently. I'm leaving, I said. You're all exhausted. Nobody is thinking clearly. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at my office. Bring every document, everything. Emails, notices, statements, signed forms. No missing pages. My father stared at me. Your office? Yes. Erin's voice cracked. Why can't we just do this here? Because this house is full of noise, I said, and I need facts. Mark stepped forward, trying to recover control. I can come alone and explain, he said quickly. No need to involve everyone. No, I said. Everyone who signed needs to be there. The representative from the firm nodded once, like he approved of that. I turned toward the door. My mother followed me a few steps. What about the money? She asked, panic creeping back in. Are you saying you won't help us? I stopped and looked at her. I'm saying I won't act in panic, I said. I'm saying I won't be pressured. Tomorrow, I will be clear. That is what you're getting from me. My father's voice turned sharp again, trying to reclaim authority. You're being cold. I looked at him. I'm being careful. I left before anyone could grab my sleeve again. Outside, the air was cool and clean. The patrol car lights reflected off my car door. I got in, closed it, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt tired and strangely steady. At home, I changed into a plain sweater and opened my laptop. I didn't do deep work. I did preparation. I made a checklist. I pulled up the filings I'd saved. I organized a meeting agenda the way I would for a difficult client. Then I opened a separate folder, one I hadn't touched in months. Inside were confirmations and records I'd kept for myself. I printed a few things. Not everything, just enough. And I placed them into a thick envelope. No label on the front. No note inside. Just documents, stacked cleanly. At 9:30 a.m. the next morning, I arrived at my office early. The building lobby smelled like fresh coffee and floor cleaner. I nodded at the security desk, rode the elevator up, and unlocked my suite. The conference room was simple. A long table, neutral chairs, a glass wall that made people sit straighter without knowing why. I set out water, not as a kindness, but because people talk less when they're drinking. Then I placed the envelope in the center of the table. I sat down, folded my hands, and waited for my family to arrive. They arrived in pieces. My father came first, 10 minutes early, as if punctuality could restore control. He wore a jacket that didn't quite sit right on his shoulders. He avoided looking at the glass wall. He sat down at the end of the table like it was still his decision where everyone belonged. My mother came next. Her eyes were swollen, and she kept smoothing her blouse as if she could iron out what happened in the last 12 hours. She didn't sit immediately. She hovered, then finally took the chair closest to my father. Aaron came in with Mark a few minutes later. Aaron's hair was pulled back too tightly. Mark carried a thick folder, and his jaw worked as if he was chewing words he didn't want to say. They sat together, angled toward each other like a unit. When the door closed, the room went quiet. I didn't fill the silence. I waited until everyone stopped shifting. Then I opened a notebook and spoke in the same tone I use with clients. "We have 48 hours, I said. So we're going to do this in order." No one argued with that. I slid a legal pad toward the center of the table. "First," I said, and I wrote the word at the top. "We confirm what exists. No opinions, no excuses. Just documents." Mark cleared his throat. "I can explain the strategy," he started. I looked at him. "Not yet." He stopped. My father frowned. "This is our home," he said. "We can't lose it." "I understand that," I replied, "but we still start with facts." I held out my hand. Mark passed me the folder. He did it reluctantly, like he was handing over a weapon. I opened it and began sorting. Notice of default, demand letter, guarantee agreement, collateral schedule. A few emails printed out, selected carefully, not the whole chain. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I just read. When I reached the page that described the collateral, I placed my finger on the line and turned the document so everyone could see. "This," I said, "is why they came to your house." My mother leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she tried to understand the words. Aaron's lips parted slightly. My father went still. Mark said quietly, "It wasn't supposed to be enforced." I nodded once. "That's not a protection." Then I continued. I asked questions that only required yes or no answers. "Did you sign this on this date? Did anyone explain the terms to you? Did you receive independent legal advice? Did you understand this was a personal guarantee?" My father looked down. "No," he said, and the word sounded like it cost him. My mother whispered, "Mark told us it was standard." Aaron's eyes flashed. "We trusted him." Mark's shoulders tensed. "I didn't force anyone," he said. I didn't respond to that. I wrote one line on the legal pad. "Responsibility sits with the signature." Then I moved to the next part. "Second," I said, "we confirm the timeline." I drew a simple line across the page and marked dates. When the documents were signed, when transfers began, when the first missed margin call likely happened based on the notices, when the debt was sold, when enforcement began. The room grew quieter with each date, like the facts were draining the last bit of denial out of the air. My father's voice turned thin. "How much do we need right now?" I looked at the demand letter. "To stop immediate enforcement, the notice says 2.4 million, I said. "But that number is a starting position. It's not always the final settlement." Mark leaned forward quickly. "It can be negotiated," he said. "I can talk to them. I know these people." The way he said "these people" made Aaron flinch. She wasn't married to an operator. She was married to a man who enjoyed sounding like one. I turned a page in my notebook. "Third," I said, "we decide what we can control." I wrote it out in steps so nobody could pretend it was emotional. Step 1. Freeze new damage. Step 2. Identify assets that can be liquidated without blowing up the rest. Step 3. Negotiate a settlement from a position of documentation, not panic. Step 4. Create repayment terms in writing, with consequences. My father stared at the pad. "Repayment terms?" he repeated. I looked at him. "Yes." My mother's voice trembled. "Bree, If you can just cover it, we'll make it right. I didn't argue. I didn't explain my feelings. I simply opened the thick envelope I had placed on the table. Everyone watched my hands. Inside were printed confirmations and summaries, neatly labeled. I slid the top page forward. It was the deed confirmation for the lake cabin. Not the old deed, the new one. The one registered to an LLC. My father's face tightened. Aaron blinked hard. My mother's hand went to her mouth. I kept my voice calm. I purchased the cabin last year, I said, after it was sold. Erin's eyes widened. You bought it? She whispered. Yes. My mother leaned forward, voice breaking. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. Because it wasn't family property anymore. It was a transaction. Mark sat back slightly, eyes narrowing like he was finally seeing the shape of something he'd missed. I placed a second page on top of the first. An assignment of debt notice. It was clean, official, date-stamped. Mark's mouth opened, then closed. My father's voice came out rough. What is that? I waited a beat, then answered plainly. It's proof that I purchased the debt, I said. The one your house is tied to. The room didn't explode. It didn't need to. Silence did the work. My mother stared at the page as if it was written in a different language. Erin's face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the chair. My father spoke first. So you can pay it? He said, and the hope in his voice was small but immediate. I watched it rise. Then I let it settle back down. I didn't buy it to save you, I said. Erin made a small sound, almost a sob. Then why? She asked. I kept my hands folded. Because I don't like being surprised, I said. And because I don't like my name being treated like an emergency fund. Mark's voice sharpened. This is crazy, he said. You can't just... I looked at him. He stopped again, like he remembered where he was. I turned to my father and mother. I am now the primary creditor, I said. That means I control the timeline and the terms. My mother's eyes filled. Bree, she whispered. You're doing this to punish us. I didn't correct her. I didn't tell her about the dinner. I didn't talk about the decades. I didn't mention the order of things. I spoke in rules. I will not foreclose today, I said, but we are going to put terms in writing. My father's jaw worked. Terms, he repeated again, like he couldn't believe the word belonged in a family room. Yes, I said, because that is how adults handle debt. Erin leaned forward, voice pleading. Please, she said, just make it go away. I met her eyes and spoke evenly. It doesn't go away, I said. It gets handled. Mark tried again, calmer this time, trying to regain the professional tone he wore like a suit. If you can settle it, then we can... No, I said. You don't negotiate this. I do. He stared at me, and I could see the moment he understood what it meant. Not emotionally. Structurally, I slid a prepared document across the table. It wasn't dramatic. It was a term sheet. Simple. Clear. No shouting required. Here's what happens, I said. I pointed to each section as I spoke. Your home will not be seized if you comply with these terms. You will sign a repayment plan. You will provide full disclosure of assets and liabilities. No hidden accounts, no casual transfers, no new debt. Erin's breath hitched. I continued. Mark will sign an agreement transferring his remaining equity, any receivables, and any liquid assets to satisfy part of the debt. He will also sign a confession of judgment clause. Mark's face went rigid. Absolutely not, he said, but his voice lacked power now. I didn't debate. Then enforcement proceeds as originally noticed, I said. My father turned toward Mark sharply. What did you do? He demanded. Mark's eyes flicked to Erin, then away. Aaron whispered, "Mark." My mother began to cry quietly, but she didn't interrupt. Crying in that room didn't change the numbers. I let the silence sit while they absorbed the reality. Then I added the part that mattered most to me. "You will move out of the main house within 30 days, I said. "You'll relocate to the cabin." Erin snapped her head up. "What?" she said, sharp and disbelieving. "Yes," I replied. "The cabin is small. It needs work. It's livable. And it will be your residence while you repay what you signed." My father's face flushed. "That's humiliating." I nodded once. "It's also practical." My mother looked at me like I was a stranger. "You're throwing us out," she whispered. I kept my tone steady. "I'm moving you," I said, "because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being the last priority and the first rescuer." Erin's voice rose, not into a scream, but into a frantic edge. "This is cruel," she said. "You're enjoying this." I shook my head once. "I'm not enjoying anything," I said. "I'm finalizing." That word changed the room. Finalizing. It wasn't an argument anymore. It was a process. Mark stared at the term sheet, then at me. He looked like a man trying to calculate a loophole and not finding one. The attorney I'd retained stepped in quietly then, entering the conference room with a folder. He placed it on the table and said, "If you'd like independent counsel, you can pause and obtain it, but the timeline is real." My father looked at him, then back to me. "You planned this," he said, not accusing, just realizing. I didn't deny it. "I prepared for it," I said. My mother's shoulders slumped. Erin's hands trembled. Mark looked down at the paper like it was a trap. It wasn't a trap. It was the first time anything in our family had been put into clear terms. My father finally spoke, voice low. "If we sign, we keep the house?" I nodded. "If you comply, yes," Erin whispered. "And Mark?" I looked at Mark. "Mark avoids the immediate criminal exposure if he cooperates, and if there is full disclosure," I said. "If he doesn't, I will provide the full file to the parties who requested it." Mark swallowed. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then my father reached for the pen. Erin stared at him, stunned. "Dad." He didn't look up. "Sign," he said, voice flat. My mother covered her mouth again, but she didn't stop him. She was past bargaining now. Mark hesitated the longest. He looked at Erin once like he wanted her to rescue him. She didn't. He signed. One by one, signatures went down on paper that would have been labeled cold in any other context. To me, it was just clean. When it was done, I gathered the pages, placed them into my folder, and stood. "I'll handle the settlement call," I said. "You'll receive the move-out instructions in writing. And you'll receive a schedule." Erin's voice came out small. "Where will we go?" I met her eyes. "The cabin," I said. "You wanted legacy. That's where it is." My father looked at me with something like disbelief. "You're a monster," he said, quietly, like he needed the word to make sense of losing control. I paused, then answered in the same calm tone I'd used all morning. "No," I said. "I'm just the creditor now." I walked out of the conference room and into my office, closed the door, and sat down at my desk. My hands didn't shake. I opened my laptop, pulled up the settlement contact details, and prepared to make the call that would formalize everything. Then I waited for the line to connect. The settlement call took 17 minutes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't negotiate like I was trying to win. I negotiated like I was closing a file. I confirmed the assignment of the debt. I confirmed the payoff figure. I confirmed the release language. I asked for the timeline in writing and the exact contact person for the final documents. I repeated key terms back to them so nobody could later claim misunderstanding. When the call ended, I saved the email thread and printed the confirmation. Then I did something small and ordinary. I cleaned my desk. I stacked the signed term sheet in a folder. I clipped the settlement confirmation behind it. I labeled it with the date. I put it in my cabinet, the same cabinet where I keep client files, because that's what this had become. A few hours later, my attorney sent me a short message. Everything is enforceable. Everything is clear. That was all I needed. I went home before rush hour. I stopped at the grocery store and bought plain things: tea, bread, fruit, nothing that looked like celebration. My body didn't want celebration. It wanted quiet. At my apartment, I took off my shoes and stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to nothing. The refrigerator hum, the distant traffic, a neighbor's door closing somewhere down the hall. I made tea, the kind my grandmother used to drink. Not for sentiment, just because it tasted like calm. I carried the cup to the window and watched the city settle into evening. My phone buzzed twice while I stood there. First, my mother. Then, Aaron. I didn't answer. I waited until the tea was half gone, until my shoulders lowered without me thinking about it, until the room felt like mine again. Then I picked up the phone and opened the messages. My mother's text was short. Please tell me this isn't real. Aaron's was longer. It started apologetic, then turned sharp, then softened again. It ended with one line that almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. You're still the only one who can fix this. I put the phone face down on the counter. Then I opened my calendar and created a recurring reminder for myself. Just one line. Review boundaries. Because it's easy to be clear in the middle of a crisis. It's harder when things get quiet and everyone starts acting like the past was just a misunderstanding. Over the next month, the move happened exactly the way the document said it would. My parents packed their main house in stiff, silent increments. Aaron and Mark showed up with a rented truck and tired faces. Nobody spoke about fairness or love anymore. They spoke about boxes, keys, dates, and what needed to be forwarded. They moved into the cabin. I didn't go with them. I didn't supervise. I didn't walk through the rooms with a checklist. I had already done the only part that mattered. I did drive up once, a week later, alone. Not to check on them, to check on the property. I arrived early in the morning when the lake was still and the air smelled like damp wood and pine needles. The porch boards creaked the same way they always had. The dock leaned slightly, like it always did after winter. The place looked tired, but honest. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and listened. Inside, I could hear faint movement, a cabinet closing, footsteps, a muffled voice. Not happiness, not peace. Just life, forced to fit into a smaller shape. I didn't knock. I walked down to the edge of the water and stood by the dock for a minute, watching ripples move across the surface like slow handwriting. Then I turned back toward my car. On the drive home, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt something more stable. Ownership. Not just of property, of my time, of my attention, of my future. A week after that, I flew out. I had a villa overseas that I'd purchased quietly through a shell company, the way people do when they want a life that isn't open to committee votes. It wasn't huge, it wasn't flashy. It was simple and clean, with a small kitchen, a table by a window, and mornings that started with birds instead of phone calls. The first morning there, I woke up and made coffee. I opened the windows and let fresh air in. I swept the floor because it needed it. I folded laundry because it was there. I walked to a nearby market and bought bread and fruit like it was the most normal thing in the world. No one asked me for anything. My phone stayed quiet. Later that week, an email came in from my attorney back home, confirming that the settlement was complete and the release had been filed. The home was safe under the new terms. The repayment schedule was active. The enforcement threat was gone. I read it once, saved it, and closed my laptop. Then I went back to my day. In the months that followed, my parents tried to reach out in small ways: short messages, holiday greetings, photos of the kids that were meant to soften me. I responded politely when I chose to, briefly. Not cold, just contained. I didn't reopen the old arrangement. I didn't volunteer solutions. I didn't step into the role they had assigned me. When Aaron asked once if I could just help with something simple, I replied with one sentence: I can't take this on. And I left it there. People sometimes ask me if I regret it, if I feel guilty. The honest answer is that guilt fades when your life stops being treated like an unpaid resource. What stays is clarity. The kind you get when you finally stop arguing for a seat at a table that never planned to make room for you. A few weeks ago, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, a cousin on my mother's side. Quiet voice, careful phrasing. She said her brother had started handling their parents' finances and things felt off. She said there were papers she didn't understand. She asked if I could look at something, just to tell her if it was normal. I told her yes, not because I was stepping back into old patterns, because this time it was different. She wasn't asking me to sacrifice myself so someone else could keep their lifestyle. She was asking for clarity. And I know what it feels like when clarity is the only thing between you and being used. So I opened my notebook, wrote down her details, and told her the same thing I tell every client. Bring me the documents, every page. If you've been listening and you've ever felt like you were ranked last in your own family, I'm glad you're here. Take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel reach more people who need a quiet place to land. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'll have 2 popular stories waiting for you next, and I'll see you there.